to some of our familiar CARP scholars, as well as some new faces or new names that we see. Because we have a few guests with us today, I'll just say a few words about the CARP program, as maybe some of you are not as familiar with it. So CARP, or the Climate Adaptation Research Program, is a program that's led by our team here at the University of Arizona in the USA, in partnership with Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and more recently with partners in the Pacific Island region, as well as in the Latin America and Caribbean region. So our program aims to support young and early career scholars in these regions to do research on disaster risk reduction topics, specifically disasters that are related to climate change. So we provide funding, which we get from the USAID, or the United States Agency for International Development, along with technical support to these scholars to do their research and to build research capacity. So we do this in various ways. These webinars are one of the ways that we help to not only build capacity, but build community among people who are working in DRR. We also host in-person workshops in these regions where we engage with our scholars in person. And of course, we provide ongoing support as scholars are working through their research projects. So it's a very exciting program that is expanding, and there's a lot of really great work happening. On the African continent, we currently have 33 projects that we're funding. Each of these projects is made up of a team of researchers, and overall we're supporting more than 120 researchers to do work on DRR and climate adaptation. So lots of exciting stuff happening. If you would like to learn more about the program, we encourage you to visit our website, and maybe Corey or Eunice will be able to paste that into the chat. I would also like to just use this opportunity to quickly say that we are in the process of receiving proposals for new projects that we want to fund. So if you are interested in submitting a proposal to CARP, then please also get in touch with us, and we can share the request for proposals with you. And the deadline for that is the end of July. So yes, with that, let's shift over to our webinar today, which we're very excited about. We, of course, have Eunice Wangui with us from Nairobi, Kenya. Eunice is a distinguished climate action data scientist who has over 14 years of expertise in Earth observation data analysis, specifically for natural resource monitoring across Eastern and Southern Africa. Eunice's research work involves addressing critical concerns and integrating gender perspectives in sustainable development initiatives. She significantly contributed to the report on assessing the gender gaps in the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction for the Africa Program of Action in 2024. She is currently heading the Geospatial Unit at the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, or RCMRD, in Nairobi. And she provides advisory services on modern climate information and early warning systems to 20 member states. In her current role, Eunice spearheads the development of satellite-based land degradation research, and she facilitates policy dialogue, ensuring gender perspectives are integrated. She also serves as the focal point for the GeoLDN Help Desk, a regional service station for the LDN Toolbox and Sustainable Development Goal 15.3 reporting. Eunice holds a Master of Science degree in Geospatial Science and Remote Sensing, specializing in sustainable land management. Her commitment to leveraging geospatial technology for climate resilience and sustainable development has made her a pivotal figure in the field of environmental conservation and climate action. So we welcome Eunice, and I'll hand over to you to share with us your perspectives. Thank you, Eunice.
Thank you so much, Julia, for the great introduction. And thank you for giving us a background of CAP and also how we can network even further. I will begin by sharing my screen so that we get to learn more about gender dimensions in DRR. So I'll be making this presentation. It will take us like an hour and a half thereabout. And I'm very privileged because for a long time, I've been generating knowledge products related to climate risk assessment using satellite data for the Africa region, specifically Eastern and Southern Africa region. I'm quite happy that in recent time, we are strongly appreciating the role of gender, because at the end of the day, with the knowledge products that we generate as researchers, the idea is to empower the community, the stakeholders, from government to the local grassroots level. And the best way to go about this has been to disaggregate and actually see these stakeholders, who are they? Who are they? And that's the question that I will be answering, from the roles from policy level to actually the implementation, the challenges, the gaps that we all witness as far as gender is concerned, and within the auspices of disaster risk reduction. So as you've been told, I'm Eunice Mwangi, climate action data scientist working at RCMRD, and I'm happy to take you through this interesting presentation. Structured this particular webinar in 10 topics, very significant to gender mainstreaming in disaster risk reduction. And I will begin by discussing the importance of gender mainstreaming. Why is it even important? Why are we talking about it? Very, very interesting aspect. Then what are some of the concepts we are familiar with that are related to gender? Then I will proceed by taking a deep dive into the policy framework from the global to the regional scale. Which policy instruments are guiding how gender issues are being mainstreamed in terms of governance at the global and regional level, and how does this impact the local grassroots community? Again, I'll be happy to take you through that. Then the UN Women, United Nations Women, has released a policy tracker, and this particular policy tracker is called the WRD policy tracker. It refers to women resilience to disaster. Where are we in terms of statistics? How many policies are gender sensitive? So this is what this policy tracker will tell us: how many countries have complied to having legislations, to having structures, to having policy instruments that have integrated gender into their disaster risk related policy documents. Then proceed and discuss the DRR framework inclusive of gender, where we look at which frameworks are available that have factored in the gender aspect. And with that, I'm going to also have a look at the good practice guidance. You know, what is the good practice? When we talk about good practice, what do we mean in terms of adaptation of disaster risk in the context of vulnerable groups and also in the context of the high-risk marginalized communities? From there, we're going to look at gender gaps in disaster risk reduction. And this is going to be the most interesting session because it will give us an awareness of why this discussion is very important, to be able to look at what are some of the challenges local communities in sub-Saharan Africa region, mainly the pastoralist communities, what challenges are they experiencing? So we are going to look at that, and I've structured it from the perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals. We want to look at the SDGs and see to what extent have these SDGs affected gender mainstreaming. How can we be able to relate gender to SDG 1, for example? So that's a very interesting discussion we'll have at topic 7. Then we're going to look at opportunities for disaster risk reduction, gender mainstreaming. Now that we've looked at the challenges, what opportunities exist? You know, and this is very interesting because we want now to figure out what solutions are best in terms of addressing gender gaps, so that we are able to deal with the segregation, we are able to deal with the inequalities, with the insecurities that come with gender identity. Then we're going to proceed and look at gender mainstreaming strategies. Again, goes along well with opportunities. And finally, I want us to look at institutional gender mainstreaming strategies. And coming from RCMRD, I'll be more than happy to share with you the approach that RCMRD as an institution has taken into mainstreaming gender strategy in its structure, from project implementation to training facilities, and basically supporting STEM education within our partners and member states. To start with, let me first of all break down gender, because gender is a term that is widely used but also commonly misunderstood. Because for a long time, when you talk to anyone, they just tell you gender is just women. But what we fail to understand is that gender is both women and men, girls and boys. What is unique about gender in the aspect of disaster risk reduction is the relationships we have between men and women. What are the gaps? What are the challenges? You know, what are the inequalities between these two genders? So that is the aspect that is very significant when we are trying to understand gender. So it is both men and women, but from the lens of understanding the gaps, the inequalities, and the challenges experienced by both gender. And in terms of just thinking about the importance of gender in the scope of disasters, you'll notice that disasters, in as much as disasters happen, and I can mention examples of these disasters, we are talking about drought, especially in the sub-Sahara region. My focus will be so much based in the sub-Sahara Africa region, but I'll also try to broaden it so that we can be accommodative to all stakeholders. So disasters affect people disproportionately. And this is very important to understand, because this is influenced by key things such as gender, how you will be affected by a disaster like drought or floods is also inclined to the gender, to the age, and also to the ethnicity. You know, the communities respond. How are communities responding to flash floods, for example? Okay, and other factors that influence this response include religion, sexuality, and also disability. And this brings us again to our discussion, whereby we're trying to see, we want to be able to concentrate first on gender and look at these other parameters in the background to see how these disasters can be better managed within the policy frameworks that have been put in place. As we again try to appreciate the importance of disasters, let me also highlight that it is a family crisis. At the grassroots level, we have the community, we have a family setup. And when a disaster happens, like floods, let me just quickly say floods, and I can also just mention that in Nairobi, I'm based in Nairobi, we recently experienced floods, El Nino-like floods, and this brought in a very good picture of adaptation, vulnerability, and how policies can be able to influence decisions related to resilience of the community. So this particular your family unit, in times of a disaster, you realize that men's ability to provide is disrupted, you know, and as a society, especially in the African context, men are considered to be the providers. So in times of a disaster, the ability to provide is cut off. Then on the other hand, women and girls, domestic and caregivers' role become more challenging due to limited resources. And I remember I'm trying to give you the picture of this family unit that is geographically based in the dryland, in the Sahara region of the continent. You can also think about the Karamoja region. I've seen we have people from Uganda, from the Borana ecosystem. That's the family unit I'm trying to capture here. And we are saying that the roles as we understand them in gender of women become challenging due to the limited resources. Because again, with these challenges, with the disasters, the ability to provide becomes more stressful. These particular challenges present a new set of challenges. These challenges include stress, gender-based violence. We're going to see more of that as we continue. It also introduces women's mobility restriction. You realize that some communities are going to restrict the movement of women, and it also leads to early marriages, the disasters and calamities, because everyone is trying to cope at the family unit level. So you realize there are communities that one of their coping strategies is to marry off their children. But have we ever asked ourselves why? You know, because we look at it from the lens that this is oppressive, you're doing something wrong, but we also forget, is this a coping strategy? Because as we talk about disasters from the Sendai framework, where we are trying to build resilience, are we very clear about the vulnerability that probably it is a coping strategy for some of these communities to be able even to release some of their children for early marriages and drop them out of school, not with very bad intention, but as a coping strategy to the disasters that the community is facing. We will see that as we continue. Then the other result of these disasters is drug abuse, especially among men. Again, to be able to just keep up with the fact that now you are not able to provide for your family. We have all these natural calamities happening. You don't have alternatives. You realize that most of the time in communities, men and the young people at large get into drug abuse. Then we have recruitment and radicalization. We've seen all these outfits like the Al-Shabaab in the region, where as we try to understand what is the basis, what drives young people to join such groups. And you will learn that some of these radical groups are driven by disasters. As people are trying to cope with these disasters, radicalization of young people easily get recruited into this negative group and also into violent extremism network. So now, let us now look at the basic concepts of gender. What are some of these concepts that we probably are aware of, but most of the time they are misinterpreted or misunderstood? We'll quickly just highlight this terminology so that we can be on the same page, so that as I refer to sex, gender norms will be on the same platform. So, and as we look at sex is basically biologically defined and genetically acquired differences between male and female. So it's biological. So we can just rest assured that when we speak about sex in a DRR, gender mainstreaming, we are referring to biological, genetically acquired differences between male and females, okay? Then gender refers to social cultural constructs which distinguishes differences in the attributes of men and women. So gender is social cultural. Okay, it is not biological. And that's why there's a lot of misinterpretation. There's a lot of misinterpretation that goes around the gender concept. Okay, so it is not biological at all. It's more of a social cultural construct of the differences and attributes of men and women. And I can also highlight that it is based on the geographic region. So you'll realize that different geographic regions perceive gender differently because, again, it's socio-cultural. So you'll realize that the geographic context is very significant as you're trying to understand the place of gender in disaster risk management. The other term that is commonly used is the gender norms. Gender norms refer to roles and responsibilities that society defines, expects of men and women. What are the roles of women in your society? A very interesting question, because you'll also notice it is so much based on the geographical region you find yourself, whereby you find that certain roles, certain responsibilities are placed on the woman and others of the man. And those are some of the gaps we're trying to see. Well, have we been getting it wrong all this time? And change over time and vary with these norms vary with time and also with different cultural context. But there are those that have maintained their cultural gender norms, traditional gender norms, and we want to see, are they still helpful, especially when we consider the Sub-Saharan Africa region, where poverty is high, where disasters cause massive death of population and livestock. We want to ask ourselves, are these gender norms serving the people? Are they serving the women? Are they serving the men in this society? Then gender equality. What is gender equality? Gender equality refers to equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of women, men, girls, and boys. So here we are talking about rights, equal rights. Do both genders have equal rights? And when we talk of equal rights, what are we actually saying? Are we actually planning to say that what a man can do, a girl can do, as far as addressing gender disaster risk is concerned? So that is gender equality. It is different from gender equity. Gender equity, on the other hand, refers to fairness of treatment and opportunities for women and men according to their respective needs. So it's about fairness here. It's not about equality, because sometimes equality, we want to see what you can do, I can also do. But in gender equity, we are trying to look at the fairness of treatment and opportunities for men and women according to their needs. Okay. Then the other great terminology we have within gender is empowerment. And empowerment refers to change that gives individuals greater freedom of choice and action. Okay, so this is change. So we are trying to challenge ourselves. It's hard because we are bound by our cultural practices, the communities where we grew up, how we have understood our society, and we are trying to see, are we at a level where we need to be fully empowered? And by this, we are saying we want to change and have greater freedom of choice. We want to have a choice in terms of the roles and responsibilities that the society has placed on us. Of course, it takes a lot of friction. It takes a lot of insecurity, because sometimes someone may feel, do you want to take my job? Is that what empowerment is about? Is it for everyone? How can I contribute to this gender empowerment? Are you trying to take over a man's role? Are you trying to undermine the role of another woman? That is where the conflict comes in, as we try to ensure every woman is empowered, or every man is all equally empowered, because when men are empowered, it becomes easy to accommodate empowered women. Then we have gender integration. Gender integration is also very clear in terms of strategies applied in program assessment. Now, this is where institutions come in. What strategies do we apply in project implementation, the climate adaptation project? in terms of monitoring the program, assessment, design, and implementation. Then we have gender mainstreaming. Gender mainstreaming refers to incorporating gender perspectives into policies, strategies, programs, project activities. So this is very critical, and it's something that I've seen happening a lot, whereby for every climate action project that we engage in, we have tried as much as possible. And I like, because this is also a requirement, a donor requirement, where it has become very significant to mainstream gender, to incorporate gender perspective into policies, strategies, and also programs. Then we have another terminology, gender stereotypes. Gender stereotypes refers to ideas that people have on masculinity and femininity. I am sure each one of you must have come across the aspect that women or girls should naturally be kind, should be nurturing, should be soft-spoken. And also when you are perceived to be maybe very loud or aggressive, people think you are less of a woman because you're trying to challenge that status quo of how society perceives it. That is gender stereotype. And also the perception that boys are expected to be brave, they are not supposed to cry. These are all stereotypes. And we have seen it happening sometimes due to our own personal and conscious bias. We have become victims also of just judging maybe women, girls, even if it's your daughter, sometimes you want to challenge her. You have to be strong like a man. You know, you don't want to tell her, no, you need to be strong like a woman. Women are also supposed to be strong, you know. So those are just some of the terminologies that help us understand where are we coming from when we talk about disasters, and how as African countries, how we adapt and help our communities to deal with disasters related to climate. I have a quiz here because I want us to be interactive and to follow through. And I want to also hear from you. Whereby, asking the first question, which gender norms are you familiar with in your community? Question, which gender stereotypes have you experienced individually? Then the other question is very interesting. Listen, highlight some misconceptions about gender in the society. And I just want the participants to be able to respond. You can just raise your hand, because gender, everyone relates to a certain gender. We are within a community. So let us hear some of your responses on the gender norms. What are some of the gender norms based on the description that I've given about gender norms? Which gender norms are you familiar with in your community? And the stereotypes, and also some of the misconceptions. What are some of the misconceptions you are familiar with? Please, you can raise your hand and unmute, and then we can quickly just get your response on this. And from the group? Yes, we have.
Yes, women are mostly expected to stay at home. We are expected to work all the household activities, and also including taking care of the children, while men are allowed to go out and to relax, and also to do whatever they want.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Yes, let us take the next hand. I can see Bednico, please unmute and give us your.
Yes, good afternoon by Kenya time. And I wanted to just highlight to say, yes, there are many misconceptions and gender norms that are around our societies. Let me just highlight a few. that, even when it comes to the position in the area of work, you find that there are some norms, like it is believed that maybe jobs like when you are a cleaner, for example, they back at home, like in Botswana, but I believe also in Kenya, maybe the same. They associate that no, you cannot be a man and then you find yourself getting a job for a cleaner. They feel that this is for women, for example, and also maybe as a secretary, they believe that you cannot be employed as a secretary to maybe the chief executive and you are a man. They feel that those are jobs that are really set aside for women. Even I remember when we also started in the ministry, Botswana, when they established the Ministry of Gender Affairs. Yeah, people who, if you are a man and you go there to get employment, they feel that you have gone to work in the Ministry for Women. What is happening with you? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those questions. I will stop that so that we proceed. You can begin to see and relate with gender issues where we are having a problem, because we can clearly see that our perception is women are supposed to do certain jobs. We're supposed to be cleaners at home. We should take sort of the light task. And then the hard task, we perceive it to be sort of a male industry. And clearly that's just how we do it, certain jobs, if it's a secretary, we just believe, no, secretaries should just be women, and if it's a nurse can only be a woman. And I'm like, what is the problem about having a male nurse? So those are some of the gender norms, gender stereotypes that we get to a place and we ask ourselves, are they serving us? Especially in Africa, I think we can all agree that probably there's a level of empowerment in Europe, in America, in Australia, and other regions where there's a level of empowerment in gender. But in Africa, it's time that we rethink and reconsider our gender norms and stereotypes so that, number one, we can boost development. And number two, we can be able to drive the change that we want to see. Remember, women are more than 50% of the population in Africa. So can you imagine empowering the whole gender to have over 90% of empowered community as far as gender is concerned? Surely that's what we are aiming for. Now, we'll proceed now with the policy framework. Because for gender to be integrated in our day-to-day lives, to cascade from global perspective to the grassroots community level, it's very significant to look at the policy framework, because it's only within the policy framework that key players in the industry can be able to implement and execute the policy agenda within their docket. And this is what can empower the grassroots community. So at the very top, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals provides a very clear goal on goal number 5, with the intention of achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. And this was adapted during the 2016 Commission on the Status of Women. And through this, what came out clearly, and this is what excites me about this particular commitment that was made in 2016 about just trying to realize this particular goal number 5 on gender equality, is that we need to ensure that no woman or girl is left behind. And I felt, is that too ambitious? That no one is left behind? Because sometimes when I look all around me, I'm still seeing a lot of gaps, a lot of gender inequalities. But here in this particular commission of the SDGs, during 2016, and remember our target is 2030, it was agreed that for sustainable development in a gender responsive manner, we need to leave no woman behind. And that really rang a bell in my head that a lot needs to be done. Then besides the SDG, goal number 5, we have other goals, goal 13 and 15, which are equally very, very significant, especially as we consider disaster risk reduction. Goal number 13 is on climate change, climate action, and we have seen a lot of policy instruments related to mainstreaming gender in this particular goal 13. Is it actually happening on the ground? What needs to be done so that climate action can be more gender responsive? Then when we look at also goal number 15, life on land, this is whereby stakeholders at the top-notch level have also come up with clear policy structures on goal number 15. I can mention the UNCCD, which most countries in Africa, actually almost all countries, are parties to the UNCCD, UN Convention to Combat Desertification. They also have a very good structure of gender mainstreaming. So already we can begin to appreciate that in terms of policies, we have enough. But what is preventing these policies from being effective in empowering and dealing with gender inequalities? Goal 5.5 clearly states that we need to ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. Again, we acknowledge that leadership is very key, because when you're a leader, you are supposed to give direction. You are supposed to be able to create opportunities and provide guidance. So 5.5 is very clear as an SDG that for us to achieve sustainable development by 2030, women's full and effective participation in leadership is very critical. And what is interesting is to be a leader doesn't mean that you must really hold a very high-ranking position. Being a leader is even leading yourself, is leading your family, is leading your children. How well are we doing it? So those are just some of the thoughts that come to mind as we try to cope with disasters and see how climate change is affecting us, to just see, first of all, in terms of leadership, what can I do as a person to be able to adapt this particular goal number 5? Because the structure has already been put there. How can I be able to overcome the challenges to achievement of this goal? Then in the African continent, we have other continental policy frameworks. Very many policy frameworks, especially linked to disaster risk management. And some of these include the African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. It is very clear about the role of gender in society. Then we have another strategy from the Africa Union, the Africa Union Strategy for Gender Equality and Women Empowerment. Again, a very clear strategy for a 10-year strategy, 2018-2028. We have the Maputo Protocol. This is the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the rights of women in Africa. So in terms of policy framework, I can say we are doing well. As a continent, we can do better, but within the African continent, we have all these policy frameworks designed to be able to create leadership and a strategy to integrate gender in all aspects. We also have the Africa Risk Capacity, Leading Gender and Disaster Risk Management, Gender Strategy and Action Plan. We have the Southern African Development Community, Gender Responsive Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy Plan and Action Plan, 2020-2030. This is unique to the South Africa region. Let us move to the IGAD region. The IGAD region has, organized by the IGAD Secretariat, it has the IGAD Regional Strategy and Action Plan for mainstreaming gender in disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. Again, another relevant policy framework that the IGAD Secretariat has designed, Intergovernmental Authority on Development. That is what IGAD refers to. And this is an action plan that is designed to mainstream gender in disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. Then we have the African Plan of Action for Disaster Risk Reduction, in line with the Africa Regional Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction. Again, this is very significant because it's pioneered by the UN Women, and I was happy to be able to contribute to this particular plan, to be able to assess what are some of the gaps, challenges, and opportunities in the Africa Plan of Action for Disaster Risk Reduction. And we went ahead and looked at all these global frameworks, the Sendai framework, the SDGs, and we were just trying to see what does this mean to a woman in the Karamoja region, in the Borana ecosystem, in Somali. What does this mean to them? And how can they contribute towards realizing its effectiveness? Then we have a new action plan matrix for Africa. And finally, we have national development, disaster risk management, and gender policies and plans. Then, in a nutshell, from the global framework and sustainable development, we are aware of the Paris Agreement, the Paris 2015, which was ratified in 2016. Again, this provides a framework for climate change adaptation. So again, they have a very clear chapter on gender mainstreaming and how gender can be able to contribute to greenhouse gas emission and accounting. And this particular framework is also available at the global scale, but with the interest to be adapted at the local level. And the good thing is that over 90% of the countries in Africa region are party to the Paris Agreement on climate change, climate action. Then another significant strategy at the global framework, because we have the SDGs, we have the Nansen Initiative. The Nansen Initiative is from the International Organization of Migration, where for them, it's to come up with a strategy that is able to monitor the displacement of communities due to disaster risk management. And that's why this particular initiative is very significant, because we appreciate that migration must happen. Cross-border migration always happens due to various factors. But for this particular initiative, they have keen interest in looking at the migration that is driven by disaster risk, the displacements that are happening that are forcing communities to move from one country to another due to floods, and other disasters. So, and we have many others, the Convention of Empowering Women in Disasters, again, another significant global policy that has mainstreamed gender. Now, we come closer home. Most of us are within the disaster risk reduction domain. And why this is very important is that the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is targeted at creating resilient communities through a clear understanding of the risk and coming up with mitigation strategies. It looks at disasters from three perspectives: exposure to the hazards, vulnerability, and preparedness. This is very, very significant because out of this, we have gender issues that have been highlighted in the Sendai framework that is operational 2015-2030. And this is sort of our guiding policy as disaster risk management expert, where from these four priority areas, understanding risk, strengthening risk governance, and we have, when you think of disaster, and maybe I can also just clarify, when you think of disasters, we want to understand the risk and also identify the governance structure. Very, very important. Who are the leaders responsible for managing disasters? Then the investment. We need to talk about the investment in the disaster risk situation. Then also preparedness. How well have we equipped the communities to be able to adapt to disasters? And to this end, the Sendai framework provides for gender, age, disability, and cultural perspective that should be integrated in all policies and practices. So, and women and youth leadership. So this particular aspect is integrated in the framework. The other key element is promoting women empowerment to publicly lead and promote gender equitability. The other key area is the emphasis that post-2015, because the Sendai framework came after the Hyogo. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I don't know whether it's Hyogo or Chyogo. Hyogo framework was there before Sendai framework. So this one provides that post-2015, the disaster risk plans are inclusive and accessible. Maybe I can challenge you. How many people have access to the Sendai framework and even had a look at it? Well, don't answer right now, but it can be interesting to just challenge ourselves and just see, have you ever looked at the Sendai framework and what it provides for? What are the gaps? What can be improved going forward? And finally, just for the collection and sharing of disaggregated data. When we talk about gender, we want to see disaggregated gender. Disaggregated data, and this disaggregated data should be on gender, on age, and also disability. So those are some of the recommendations that are provided in the Sendai framework. Now let us just check where we are. Where are we about the UN Women tool that tracks policy? You realize that in the African context, this tool is provided globally, but with specific focus on Eastern Africa. You realize that we have insufficient laws that ensure intersectionality of gender. Also, few countries address gender issues in a comprehensive way with solid legal policy translated into planning and strategy. And maybe just to pinpoint here, for example, if we are looking at Botswana, which is the first country there, you realize that as far as women is concerned, and here we are just looking at countries with inclusive framework, with gender inclusive framework related to disaster risk reduction, okay? And we are saying that if you take Botswana, for women, they only have a strategy. They have not advanced to the level of having a policy or a legislation. And this is according to the report that was released by UN Women. Then, if we are looking at another country like Ethiopia, when we look at women inclusive framework, we notice that what they have is a plan, just a plan. You know, because a plan is the bare minimum. At the very basic, you need to have a plan. But if you're serious enough, then we need to have a legislation. A legislation is the highest policy level document. And I must say, maybe it's a shame to see that, honestly, out of all these countries that the assessment was carried out on, there is no single country that has a legislative framework for disaster risk reduction. The best we are getting to is just a policy framework from Kenya, Uganda, and Zambia. Okay, so that tells a story about how we consider gender mainstreaming in disaster risk reduction, just from this particular policy tracker. And you can assess for the other countries, what is the problem? However, let us say we also appreciate that when we are looking at children, integration of children-sensitive framework, the disaster risk reduction framework, you notice that that's where we have, at least in Seychelles, we have a legislative framework for children, okay? And actually in Seychelles, they are very quick on ensuring they have very clear legislative framework for persons with disability, children, indigenous and ethnic minority groups, and also older people. That is quite encouraging. And this policy tracker is significant to also help countries learn from each other. You know, to just not undermine certain countries, but just allow countries to learn from each other in terms of setting a policy framework where gender mainstreaming is critically integrated in disaster risk reduction framework. And when we look at regional frameworks, like the South Africa Development Community Gender Strategy, We also have the Program of Action from the African Union on Disaster Risk Reduction and the IGAD Regional Strategy and Action Plan. You are quick to notice that we have for the Eastern and South Africa region, women-sensitive, gender-integrated, inclusive DRR frameworks are available, as mentioned earlier, more of a plan and a strategy, plans and strategy. All these documents are just either a plan or a strategy. But nonetheless, this again at least gives some hope that something is being done. Then when we are looking at high-risk group gender analysis, we can appreciate that the Sendai framework, again, these statistics being released by the UN Women, that the Sendai framework women high-risk group integration in inclusive framework of, let us look at Africa, for example, and you will notice that Eastern and South Africa, we only have 40% of countries in the region with a framework inclusive of women, just 40%, you get? Compare this with the Pacific. You see, the Pacific is doing very well, almost 85%, and the Africa and Caribbean. So again, that again explain why we are having the challenges we are as far as gender integration is concerned. Because you can see clearly the Eastern and Southern Africa region, we only have 40% of countries with frameworks, only 40%, such a small number given the many countries we have in Africa. For sure, we can be able to do better than that. Then we also want to look at the number of inclusive disaster risk reduction frameworks by high-risk groups in Eastern Africa region. This is also important because what we are seeing here is the inclusive frameworks for high-risk groups. And when we talk about high-risk groups, in this category, we have women, people with disability, children, indigenous people, older people, people living in poverty. And with a focus on women, you can see that, again, we are just at a policy. Number of inclusive frameworks. We have 3. We only have 3 policy frameworks that are gender sensitive for the Eastern Africa region. And the same can be interpreted for strategies and plans. This is quite significant and should be able to just help countries do better and improve in terms of how they are addressing gender issues. We have our next quiz. What is your role? Now we want to look at, so that we don't want to always assume it's the government, it's the other party. We want to answer this question by putting ourselves at the center of it. What is your role in influencing gender policy within your organization or your community or your space? What is your role in influencing gender policy? Let us interact on that particular question. One who wants to share insights? Do you have a role? And a role here might not be a very senior significant role. It can even be an aspiration. What is your aspiration in influencing gender policy within your organization or community or space, especially within the aspects of climate change and disaster risks? Yes, we have a hand from Lonwabo Lothango. Please go ahead.
Afternoon, Eunice. It's Lonwabo Lothango. So with regards to gender mainstreaming, we are looking at mainstreaming gender in DRR planning at a local level, because my role is to support local governments in developing disaster risk reduction plans. But we did realize that there is a lack of gender mainstreaming or gender considerations in the process. and there's a lack of participation also in the process from maybe women-led organizations, and not only women as well, but just taking a gender-centered lens. So the role would then be to ensure that there is meaningful participation in that process, so that we can also just understand the concerns or the other considerations that we might be overlooking in planning for disaster risk reduction.
Thank you. Thank you so much. He has shared with us a perception of how they are able to address the gender policy gaps. I'm sorry, I think the others, you can share your thoughts in the chat. I will be happy to just read them out towards the end. I want us to proceed, but thank you so much, because what I have picked is that already, because for policy to be effective, you need to understand the problem. And I like from what he has said, he has mentioned that there is a lack of women-led organization. That is already a starting point, because you cannot measure what you don't understand. So you first need to understand what is the problem that we're dealing with as far as gender mainstreaming is concerned. So that's a very good position to begin with. Understand the problem. What is the problem? Do we have enough women-led organization in your community, in your organization, and other spaces that you find yourselves in? What is their role? What is their role? Are they impactful? So allow me to proceed. And the other two people who raised their hands, please feel free to just put in your response. Then we can be able to look at it and discuss later. So right now, a good practice. I've talked a lot about the policies that exist at the global level and also regional level. But now, do we have a good practice that we can learn? Because someone will ask you, we've released a lot of statistics about, how countries are performing in terms of coming up with gender responsive policy framework. So we want to know and appreciate who are those that are doing better than the others. And this has been summarized again from the findings that have been developed by the UN Women Research, where we have 6 countries, Fiji, India, Guatemala, Togo, Kenya. It's good for Africa, we have Kenya there, and Chile. And when we talk about this good practice, we are saying they have mainstreamed gender. At least they are doing better than the others. Not to the level, not to the highest level, but they are doing better in terms of coming up with gender responsive policies that are addressing disaster risk reduction in the region. We move now to our next session. This particular session is also very informative because it will help us understand where the problem is. What is the problem with gender? It's a new concept we appreciate, but we want to understand what is the problem, especially in the dryland ecosystems of Africa, because I've said the context is very, very unique. The gender challenges that are being experienced in Borana region today between Kenya and Ethiopia are very different from the challenges that could be experienced in South Africa, for example. So we want to understand what are some of these gender issues that we are trying to address from, global level, regional level with all these policies. Here we go. Please mute yourself, please. Mute yourself. Thank you. We look at it under the umbrella of the SDGs, whereby I look at an SDG and clearly outline what is the problem with gender, how is gender a problem when we talk about SDG, for example, this particular one, SDG number 1 on poverty. So as far as SDG 1 is concerned, you realize that gender inequality cost sub-Saharan African countries 55 billion annually. 95 billion annually. And this is again from a report that was generated by the UN Women Research study that I support to develop the gaps in the policy document. Then Again, out of just this research in the Sub-Saharan Africa region, we noticed that majority of women do not own land and work in informal sectors, and they are lowly paid. Quite sad. The picture you can see there tells the story that these are women who are working in these farmlands, which they do not own majority. They do not own this land, and also in terms of pay, it is also very minimal. Then specifically in Uganda and Kenya, only 5 to 6% of women hold a land title. And you know, a land title is very significant because it gives you the rights and the privilege to be able to acquire a loan, to get insurance, and other mechanisms that can be able to, and other financial mechanisms that can be able to allow you to be able to develop that piece of land. So that is lacking. Today, even as we talk about this particular SDG goal number 1, we still have women impoverished by this particular challenge where you are not allowed to own land as an African woman. Reason being, you will get married, and where you will get married, it is assumed that you will be under your husband's property. Then in Malawi, only 3% of women are registered owners of commercial land. Now here we are looking at commercial land, and we are saying it's only 3% of women who are registered owners of commercial land. Then moving on, women face barriers accessing credit or insurance facilities than men. Again, because of that limitation. Because at any given point, for you to be able to access credit or insurance, you must have a form of collateral. But that is lacking because of all these gender inequalities. Then we move on to the second SDG, the one on hunger. This is also quite sensitive because the gap we see in SDG goal number 2 is that the disaster-related food insecurities have forced women and girls living in poverty into transactional sex, human trafficking, exploitation, forced labor, and forced marriage. And I'll give you a case in point, the Lake Victoria region. The Lake Victoria region for a long time has been a hub for transactional sex. It is sad, but there's this notion of fish for sex, sex for fish, because it's the men that go out to the lake to fish. Now the women are not allowed to fish, and they don't do fishing. So you realize that for them to be able to transact and get this fish for their, economic needs, they are forced into transactional sex to be able to deal with the economic crisis and food insecurities in the region. We appreciate that a lot of effort has gone into place to empower the women in the Lake Victoria region to be more financially stable. And you can see already we have some NGOs working in the area who are encouraging women that no sex for fish. Do not transact in sex to get fish from the lake. That is again another challenge, because as they're trying to adapt and become food insecure, they are forced to work in very compromising situation for survival. And that is reflected also in other arenas where there's forced labor, where there's human trafficking and forced marriages. You find that the communities in arid region, as a coping strategies for the many children that they've given birth to, the girls are married off. And as these girls are married off, it's also a coping strategies because we do not have enough food to be able to take care of the 10 children in this family. So naturally, the next course of action becomes it's easier and more adaptable to be able to marry off these girls who are in their teenage years so that they can gain stability from a rich man somewhere. Those are sensitive topics, but we're seeing it in communities. And we are saying these practices need to stop. We need to say it as it is so that we can be able to understand where is the problem as far as gender and DRR is concerned. Moving on, another challenge, a gender gap on SDG number 3, which is related to health, to maternal health, you realize that in 2020, based on the UN report, we had 7 in 10 maternal deaths occurred globally in the sub-Sahara region specifically. So in this day and age, we're still experiencing deaths, maternal deaths in the region, of course, driven by very many other factors, but affecting the achievement of this particular SDG goal. As far as education is concerned, SDG number 4, the main gender challenge here is the marriages, child marriages and teenage pregnancies, whereby still in this society, in this period, in the 2020s, we are still seeing young girls falling pregnant, school-going children falling pregnant, the school dropouts are high, and in some communities, we are experiencing the girls are being married off to old men. And this is quite sad, and it tells a very sad story as we are trying to just adapt these global policies. Then again, there's the sexual and gender-based violence that also comes into play when you're looking at gender mainstreaming and disaster risk. The other key challenge or gap that is witnessed with achievement of the SDGs in the dryland ecosystem is on goal number 6 on clean water and sanitation, whereby you realize that women especially, because again, you remember we talked about gender norms, the role of fetching water or looking for water is usually assigned to the women in the dryland ecosystems. So you find that they have to walk very long distances to look for this clean drinking water for their families and for their communities. And also you realize that there's less than 1 in every 3 women in sub-Saharan Africa is covered by safe drinking water, meaning that most communities don't have tapped water just within their homestead. They need to walk a certain distance. And I'm sure this is something we can relate to. So again, this becomes a big gap, especially when we are talking about gender equalities and gender empowerment. On SDG number 7, the gap that is witnessed here is on energy, whereby most rural areas in the sub-Sahara region are still using open fires, what we call 3 stones, to be able to prepare a meal, to cook food. But based on this SDG, we want to come up with clean energy, affordable energy. But this is not the case. As you can see, we are still using our firewood and our 3 stone to be able to light up fire for a meal. But unbeknownst to the women, because now again, the kitchen is a place for the woman in rural African societies, you realize that these open fires are affecting women's health. Through inhaling the smoke from the kitchen stoves and fire, women's health are severely affected. Again, this is quite sad because it affects their health. They develop health complications, and which might result into death. On goal number 8, on decent work and economic growth, we realize that the main challenge here is that most women are still working in informal sectors with limited social protection, land, insurance, assistance, and labor programs. As we noticed, there is really not much insurance, social protection, because for this particular photo you're seeing here, you can see there, this is just a local woman who is doing working in the informal sector in a quarry to be able to mine for a stone quarry for building and construction. Then you can see there the woman who has to carry her baby on the back and carry the firewood on her head. And the children here, mainly girls, carrying water. You ask yourself, do they have insurance? What social protection is available in these regions to be able to safeguard these women from the disasters that are associated with this kind of life? Then the gender gap that is witnessed in SDG 9 on promoting industry, innovation, and infrastructure, you realize that women in Sub-Saharan Africa region are less engaged in research and innovation. Quite sad, huh? And this is technology and also technology. Ensuring that infrastructure needs respond to the needs of women is critical for gender equality. So again, we don't have as many women in research and innovation, from medical to, to satellite data technology. We have very few women represented in research and innovation. Then the other gap is on SDG 10, which is on reduced inequality, where we are trying to, as we acknowledge that we have discrimination from gender, you realize it is also a challenge towards reducing the inequalities that are presented in intersectionality. Because all these inequalities come from all these parameters: religion, class, relational status, but of interest to us is also gender. Gender still is an discrimination aspect, whereby in all those areas we've talked about, you realize there's some segregation, there's some sort of discrimination in harmonizing gender. SDG number 11 on attaining sustainable cities and communities. The report states from the UN that by 2050, 60% of Africans will live in urban areas. You can already begin to see that this is already placing a big challenge, the poor women, to the poor women who will be affected by just this migration that is bound to happen. Where does it leave the vulnerable women and children who are sort of the breadwinners at home, and also they are involved in the domestic chores within the rural communities? Then we have the climate action number 13, whereby we are still witnessing incidences of food insecurity, loss of livelihood, and unpaid care. As we try to deal with climate change, you realize it really undermines the women and girls, especially as far as unpaid care is concerned, and also the incidences of gender-based violence that results from the climate risk and the crisis that is involved. Goal number 16, that talks about peace, justice, and strong institution. The main gender challenge here is the fact that instead of young men and women holding guns and being in school learning, they are carrying weapons. They are carrying weapons to be able to protect their sheep and livestock, which is their main source of revenue. So they justify that and they say, these sheep and goat are our main source of livelihood. We will carry a machete, we'll carry a gun, because we don't have any other option of making a livelihood. So this is quite sad as we aspire to see what is the role of gender. And in a family unit, what does this mean when climate change, desertification are resulting in very fragile and conflict over these resources in the dryland ecosystem, where communities have to fight each other to be able to acquire the livestock, to be able to protect their water points. And these are some of the challenges that we are saying we need to address as a community, and we need to make sure that gender issues actually improve the lives of this particular woman whom we are seeing here that seems to be stopping the man. This was a report from the IGAD, a land and conflict program, whereby we can already see that it causes a lot of disunity and disharmony among the community. And we ask ourselves, how can gender be empowered and mainstreamed? Again, I will just allow us to just have one question. Let me take a question, because what is left is very small. Take a response from you. Which gender gaps, inequalities have you witnessed in your community, and how can they be addressed? Let's get it from a participant. giving us a response to this quiz? The quiz is saying that which gender gaps, or what are some of the gender challenges, gender gaps, have you witnessed in your community, especially related to all those SDGs that we've talked about, the challenges there? Which ones are these, and how can they be addressed? Anyone who wants to share with us? Which of these gender gaps, even from the ones I have presented, which gender gap have you witnessed in your community that you would wish to share with us? Maybe give us an outlook of how such a challenge can be addressed.
Sarah, perhaps you'd like to share the example that you gave in the chat?
Yes, hello everyone. Of course, I've already talked it in the chat that the gender inequality that we have faced during a research year, we found that in the south of the region in Madagascar, women, girls are not allowed to own heritage from their parents. So only boys and men can have the parents' land, the parents' car, so on and so on. And the problem is when the woman would like to have a credit from a bank or things like that, they don't possess anything, so they could not have a kind of a guarantee from both credit or insurance, so they could not afford it. So how can they address it? Sometimes their brothers, sometimes I say, because it depends on the relationships of the siblings. So sometimes brother would like to share their lands, but just a part of the land, for example, a little part of the land to their sisters. This is from the brother who, how to say, who have a good spirit of state who would like to share, but apart from that, the women, the girls, just have their husband's heritage. Yeah, but this is just from the south of Madagascar, not all of my countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing insights that we can be able to relate to. Indeed, I think it's in most African countries where ideally women are not allowed to inherit. Yeah, it's actually an inheritance challenge. Women are not allowed to inherit property from their parents, especially land, because it's assumed that it's for the men, and it pushes the woman now to either want to get married, because now the society perceives it. If you don't get married, how will you be able, where will you be buried? That's the question that is normally asked. And that is what the lady from Madagascar is sharing. Quite an inequality, so to say, and a disadvantage, especially to women, whereby you don't have access to land, if you don't have access to ownership of land, especially inheritance land. How can you be able to develop yourself as a person? So thank you so much for sharing that. Let us just look at some of the ways in which we can be able to integrate gender or address these challenges that we have talked about. So what are some of the opportunities do we have for mainstreaming gender? For gender mainstreaming in the DRR. The list won't be exhaustive, but some of these strategies have proved to work. Number one, empowering young girls and boys through capacity building, and capacity building could just be as simple as education from religious institutions, from schools, and to be able to empower the younger generation, girls and boys, through capacity building program. Another strategy that has proved to work is empowering women to participate in economic development activities to enable them to raise families and also to be self-sustaining. This is also very important because it gives them a voice when they are faced with gender-based violence or when a crisis happens, a climate disaster happens like flood, drought. It's very safe for a woman to have some economic means of survival so that she's not too dependent and vulnerable within the family setup. The other opportunity is encouraging parents to let both boys and girls access school equally. Because in this day and age, we still find boys, especially in Kenya. Let me give an example in Kenya, where the Maasai community, they have migrated from Kajiado to Nairobi in search of pasture for their livestock. So just a few days ago, I was able to interact with young boys who should actually be in school, who are herding cattle. You know, and this is a weekday. They're supposed to be in school, but they are herding cattle. You know, and you wonder, okay, fine. How can we empower the families, the parents, to make sure that both boys and girls are given access equally to be in school? Then the other opportunity is to encourage communities against early child marriages and sexual harassment. These early child marriages can be accomplished through awareness, sensitization, community dialogue, and also focused group discussion. But you realize it's so much about willingness. So, and that's why I started by talking about the family unit, whereby, because it's the family that makes the decision to marry off their children. So it is very important to create awareness and to have the sensitization within a family setup that you want to break the norm. Even if you grew up in an environment where children were getting married, teenagers especially, 13, 14, we need to get to a place where we break that cycle and we appreciate the need of putting our children in school and them staying there so that they can be the change we need. Of course, it involves a lot. There are so many cultural barriers to that, especially when we are talking about this dryland ecosystem, these areas that are arid and semi-arid regions of the Eastern Africa region. It becomes a huge bottleneck, but that is the starting point. Then the other opportunities is to talk to women and girls by organizing focused group discussion to bring out the problems and challenges. Again, the more you talk about it, the more you create awareness and sensitization and ownership. Because if it's information that is pushed down on you, hardly will you accept it. But through awareness, you are likely to own the process and effect the change in your community. The other opportunity is to raise aspirations of girls and women through community awareness and also mentorship. Because for African women, when they are able to see women rising, taking up leadership positions and being strong voices in driving the change process and disaster risk programs, that is already an encouragement and it is a starting point. So that again presents a very good opportunity to be able to overcome some of the barriers we witness in gender mainstreaming. I will quickly take us through the institutional gender mainstreaming, because we all come from institutions. This is going to be easy because, again, as institutions, we have a big role to play in mainstreaming gender. At RCMRD, we have gender strategy with clear objective on how we can be able to empower and raise the standards of women. In our first objective within an institutional framework is to improve women leadership in Earth observation and create a working environment that gives equal opportunity regardless of gender. This means we are engaged so much in mentorship, gender awareness trainings, and also promoting gender balance. This has been quite significant in realizing this, in trying to address some of the gender inequalities and gaps that we have seen from the past slides. The other objective within the gender strategy is to integrate gender consideration during Earth observation application training. We normally conduct several trainings, and one of our key mandates is to ensure that we integrate gender considerations in these particular trainings. Then we have our third objective, improving the skills of participants in the use of Earth observation applications to address gendered development issues. Again, skills are very important because they are able to empower communities to be able to address some of these challenges, especially from an institutional perspective, and also strengthen the monitoring, evaluation, and learning. The other aspect of gender mainstreaming within institutions is within projects. At the moment, we have 5 key projects that are gender sensitive with gender aspects mainstreamed, and these include Passage, which is financed by CLARE, Climate Adaptation and Resilience, mainly strengthening pastoralist livelihoods in the Africa Greater Horn through effective anticipatory action. So this is a project with a very clear gender mainstreaming strategy. The other project is the UNDRR. UNDRR has a project at RCMRD on early warning systems that is also gender sensitive and has a very clear structure of gender mainstreaming. The other project is land degradation neutrality from the group of Earth observation, where as we support countries achieve SDG 15 and may meet the commitments provided by UNCCD, we have a gender component of how we can be able to empower genders as we try to address the goal 15.3. Then we have the Digital Earth Africa program that is also has a clear component on gender mainstreaming. And the other key project at RCMRD that is gender sensitive is GMES and Africa program. Again, another Earth observation leverage project that deals with service areas related to land degradation that we have also considered aspects of gender. And in all this approach, you realize that we have integrated disaggregated data on gender, whereby we disaggregate the data based on the sex and age. And another way is to analyze gender. Very significant, whereby through this project, we are able to conduct gender analysis to understand specific needs, capacities, and vulnerabilities of boys. So these projects are very significant because they enable us to be able to conduct an analysis and understand what are the unique needs, capacities, and vulnerability of both boys and girls, or women and men. And also through this project, we have managed to identify the gender norms. And as we identifying the gender norms, we also realize that these gender norms, they trigger the gender imbalance in terms of the domestic chores that are gender specific, religious beliefs, school enrollment, political alignment, that you realize that the gender norms really influence how the community responds to these particular key areas. Then also in terms of training, we have tailored and equitable training activities that have mainstreamed gender. And we also have a policy on gender balance and diversity. The other key area where we have integrated gender at RCMRD is through the STEM training. The STEM training is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Through the training programs at RCMRD, we have made a deliberate policy instrument whereby we make sure that minimum 30% of the student enrollment is women. And interesting enough, based on the current statistics, the institution has improved over time, where we at least are able to see that we're even having 40% of women enrolled in a course who are from either gender. Then, just to promote gender mainstreaming, RCMRD has managed to come up with events that encourage participation of innovative approaches from women, and also just trying also to encourage men to give their best shot. Some of these events include the RCMRD International Conference, which we will also hold this particular year, August 2024. This is an avenue where we encourage women participation to contribute their research ideas and share with peers, especially innovative science. Then we have the Space Challenge program and a mentorship program that is geared especially for the young people, both boys and girls, to participate in competitions that is going to help them create awareness about unique gender roles and strategies. That marks the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention, for staying on out this particular session. I want to just take 2 questions, then I will hand it back to Julia. So if you have a question, you can just please share your question or a feedback. Then we can hand over to Julia for closing. Or a comment.
Eunice, we had a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe I can read them out. Earlier, we had a question from Calvin Swara, who asked, what are some of the parameters or indicators that are used to measure the impacts of the policies on DRR? So some of the policies that you highlighted, what are the indicators? And then we have a question as well from Salah Abu Kawasha, sorry. How can we effectively promote women's participation in community decision-making without inadvertently exposing them to backlash or violence from within their communities?
Okay. Thank you so much for those particular questions. Let me begin with the second one, where we have seen awareness is very important, sensitization, because through sensitization programs and awareness, the community, especially from the grassroots level, is able to own the process. Because it's one thing to have very global, very nice to have policies that are giving a direction on gender, and it's another to have ownership. So for this ownership to be sustained, awareness and sensitization is very critical so that you can feel you are part of the process. So for me, I would just look at it more of awareness. Let us look at more awareness just as an entry point into this. Then the other question from Calvin's on some of these parameters. I hope I got it right. Let me see that. Can see it, but I can try and respond to this, whereby, especially for the policy track, some of the aspects that were considered was interviews, whereby they interview a cross-cutting section of women drawn from different sectors of the communities to understand what are some of the challenges, gaps, and opportunities are we seeing that affect the women, for example, in terms of dealing with disasters in the community. And this is how I actually got to contribute to the UN Women report they were doing for the Sendai framework, whereby they want to look at each woman from institutions. They go to the grassroots level and do some sort of interviews to be able to assess and gauge what are the perceptions. And this was done in selected countries within the region. A sampling strategy was used to be able to capture the thoughts of the community in terms of the perceptions on gender. Thank you so much. It's spent. Let me hand it over now to Julia. I'll continue being available. We will share more, and the presentation will be made available through Julia and the entire community. Thank you very much for your attention and your contribution.
Thank you so much, Eunice. We really appreciate your comprehensive presentation. I can see from the chat already that people have gotten a lot of value out of what you had to say. I found it very interesting personally. Some of the things that stood out to me was way back at the start, you gave some explanations around what gender really is. So often we think of it just as being women and how we should look at how women are affected by disasters, for example, but really it's more than this. It's about the relationships between men and women, boys and girls. And, disasters are really a family crisis, and gender perspectives give us the opportunity to understand how these affect the whole family. You shared with us and got us to think about some gender norms, stereotypes, and misconceptions. Which I think was really valuable. And throughout your presentation, I liked how you encouraged us to reflect and to share about our own role and our own experiences with gender in our local areas and organizations. So thank you for that. Importantly, Eunice, you highlighted a lot of the policy considerations around gender and DRR. Such as the SDGs, where SDG 5 encourages us or asks us to leave no woman behind. And of course, SDG 13 on climate action calls for climate action to be more gender responsive. You also highlighted many of the policy frameworks on the continent where gender and women's rights are important, and then also the importance of global frameworks, especially, of course, the Sendai framework on DRR. Something that I found really interesting was some of the challenges you highlighted that women and men experience, and some of the adaptation strategies that they have to use, like the sex for fish example, and child marriages. Some of these things are really concerning and just highlights the importance of addressing gender at the grassroots level. And then you spoke about how women are less engaged in research and innovation, and some of the opportunities for mainstreaming gender into our DRR practices. So there was a lot more to your presentation than that, but those were some of the things that stood out to me. And yes, again, thank you so much for your time and your effort and this interesting presentation. So we are a little over time, so we won't hold anyone longer on the call, but just to say to our participants, thank you all for joining. The session has been recorded and we will be sharing this out. So if some of your colleagues had to leave a bit early, please let them know that we will share the recording of the presentation. Eunice, I'm not sure if you're comfortable sharing your email, but I encourage you all to reach out either to me or perhaps Eunice, if she's comfortable sharing her email, if you have further questions about her work. So thank you all very much, and I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, I will end the webinar now, but please do reach out. I see Eunice has shared her email, and you can always email me as well. Thanks, everybody.
Julia, is it possible to share the register?
Hi, Lanwabo. What is your question?
Is it possible to maybe share the register with me, please?
Yes, for sure. Do that. Can you just pop your email into the chat and I'll share?
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the call now. Have a great day.